No proof is not enough.
Boa noite, pessoal, tudo bem? Todo mundo aí? E esse time aí, pessoal, para começar o dia? Tá ruim? Estamos ruim de elenco? Professor Dekker, doutor Dekker, doutor David. Pretinho aqui, perdido aqui no meio. Bom, vamos lá, pessoal, 6h05. Primeiramente, eu gostaria de agradecer aos nossos patrocinadores, em especial a ICL, que nos ajudou bastante, aí se tornou possível esse evento, a Cargill, a BI, que é impossível falar o nome, então depois eu vou deixar para o Paulo essa missão aí, mas agradecer ao Rafael Santos, lá da BI, que nos ajudou bastante, o Ivan Rigoletto, que está aí, da Yamana Gold, nosso patrocinador também, o Ricardo e o Rama, da Cargill. A Cargill, além de patrocinar, pô, eu não vou nem tentar, Rafa. O Ricardo e o Rama da Cargill, que além de nos patrocinar, eles compraram mais de 100 ingressos, então, sem dúvida, a Cargill vai ser a empresa com o maior número de participantes aqui. E o Troy, que vai ser o nosso palestrante também, e o Carlos Perisotto aí da ICL, que nos patrocinaram e tornaram esse evento possível, e a cada um de vocês, os amigos que divulgaram. Eu só vou dar alguns comandos aqui, pessoal. Como o evento, quando as palestras forem em inglês, como vai ser a primeira do Dekker, vocês têm que escolher ali, ó, no globinho Interpretation, vocês colocarem em português, vocês vão ouvir a voz do Felipe em português, que é o nosso tradutor. Obrigado, Felipe. Um abraço, você, fera brava. E aí vocês vão ouvir em português. Quem quiser ouvir o áudio original, é só deixar o globinho ali no off, né? E aí vocês vão ouvir a voz do palestrante e quem estiver falando em inglês. Queria agradecer muito ao David Provan, meu irmão branco, lá da Austrália. Esse evento nasceu no meu coração lá em março de 2020, no comecinho da pandemia, e nas nossas mentes, há alguns meses atrás, falei com o Paulo, e o Paulo falou, você tem certeza? Eu falei, não, mas vamos sem certeza mesmo. E aí a gente convenceu o David, que é outro louco também, que nem a gente, e aqui estamos. David, por favor, sua vez aí, você puder fazer as honras da casa e cumprimentar o pessoal e dar a sequência aí do nosso evento.
Thank you, Hugo. Good evening, Brazil. Welcome to the first New View event that we have conducted overseas in a different language. So welcome. ForgeWorks is very excited to be hosting this event. And firstly, thank you to all of you for taking the time to come and to listen and to explore different ideas in safety. Thank you to our sponsors, ICL Group, Cargill, Boehringer Ingelheim, and Yamana Gold. They have brought this event to you in Brazil. And thank you to our speakers. They have given us their time voluntarily to support this event, to help to share these ideas all over the world. So thank you. Paulo, can you please introduce Professor Dekker?
Okay, thanks, Dave. Hello, everyone. All right, so I have to say something about this person, because this is a honor for me to introduce the next speaker. He is the person who inspired us to organize this event and start this whole conversation, how to do things differently, how to do safety differently. Isaac Newton once said, if I could see further, was by standing on the shoulders of giants. And for us, definitely, this person is a giant who we stand on his shoulders to see further. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to Professor Sidney Dekker.
Obrigado, Paulo. Obrigado. Boa noite. Given that I am being translated my practiced Portuguese will be useless. So because you'll hear real Portuguese rather than my bumbling. So thank you for joining. It is a pleasure to be able to talk to you guys about this evening. Thank you for joining us at this late hour. Some 10 years ago, a whole bunch of industry came to the then new Safety Innovation Lab at the university that I had set up. And among them was also Kim, a dear colleague that you will hear from just a bit later about how to implement some of these things. But the question was this. The question that industry came with was this. They said, for the last 10, 20 years, we have been investing a lot of time and a lot of paperwork and a lot of resources into safety. And it's not getting any better. When you look at the numbers, yes, we can massage our injury numbers and make them look better. But in terms of the serious things and some fatalities, things are not improving. What is improving is the amount of bureaucracy, if you call that improving. What is increasing is the amount of paperwork and the immense amount of bureaucracy and compliance burden that we all feel. And so, is there something different that we can do? Should we start to think about safety differently? And so this is the question that we need to get our head around. Now, when you look at the type of problems that the industry came to us with, the number of compliance people who work with safety compliance in companies, has increased almost twofold, so doubled over the last 20 years. And the let me just check one thing with Dave here. Dave, are you listening? You are listening, right? Can you forward the file, turn it into a PDF? Should I do that in order to, because there's some pictures that I want to show you.
Send it to me in PDF, Sidney.
Very good. In that case, I need a 2-minute offline, not offline, but a 2 minutes hiatus in order to make that happen. Is that okay?
Yes.
You can fill 2 minutes.
Let me stand in, Sidney, because I think this is important for our colleagues to bring to life. Not that Sidney needs any help bringing his messages to life, but I think the pictures will really help. So I spent the first 10 years of my career doing safety the way that I'd learnt to do it in industry and at university. And it wasn't until Sidney came to Australia and I was worried about the lack of progress that we were making with reducing injuries and serious injuries that I found the opportunity to connect with Sidney at the university. And it really helped me to make sense of the problems that I was seeing in my organization and also to find the possibilities to do things differently. And so that was 10 years ago now, and really sent me on a personal journey of exploring more of the things that we can do in our organizations than what we are currently doing today. So I really valued that 10 years with Sidney and the opportunity to then learn and explore and do my own research, which I will talk to you all about tomorrow evening. So what inspired this event was the excitement in safety that was happening in Brazil. Even though it's a long way from Australia and to Brazil, seeing what Hugo was doing and Paulo and many of our colleagues in Brazil, it was something that I thought was an amazing opportunity to connect cultures and connect ideas and to find a way to bridge across the language challenges that we all face when we're trying to connect globally. It's very easy for us to get on a meeting together or get on a call together, and but the language sometimes is the challenge. So Sidney, are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Dave, no, absolutely. And I agree, Dave. Of course, our relationships with Brazil go back many years, and this started with David Woods, of course, my own professor, inviting a group of us to come down to Brazil, to come over to Brazil many years ago, and this has led to some really fruitful collaborations. For example, with Eder and Hickson at PUC, who got his PhD with me eventually and spent time in Lund, and there was other students that came back and forth, some of whom we even have at Griffith working now, so at this university. So colleagues, so thank you, Dave, for that introduction. The ideas behind safety differently, and this is important to understand, have always been driven and inspired by the demand from industry, saying, it's not working for us, give us something better. But what is it that isn't working? Well, really two things. The first is that we have become obsessed with seeing safety as stopping things from going wrong. That's our job. We need to stop things from going wrong. And we need to identify all these things that can go wrong, all these negative events, and we have to put barriers in place and stop them from happening. This has led to this explosion in rules and compliance demands and requirements and constraints. And we think that people are our major problem to control, right? It's these, we have okay systems, but it's these stupid people who make things bad. And so we see our success in the number of negative events that we have sort of prevented. So the smaller that number, the better we are doing, right? More rules, more barriers, and fewer negative events. That seems to be safety. In fact, so yesterday, I ran into an old colleague, and he said to me that he hadn't got a safety job that he had applied for because he was too much in safety differently. The person who got the job had on their CV, I was responsible for operations when we had 7 million man hours without an incident, which is of course a lie anyway. You know, you just make the evidence go away. And besides, it wouldn't be your achievement, right? Because there's lots of other factors. But that is still typical, right? That is unfortunately still typical, that we celebrate the zero, we celebrate the absence of negatives, and we have all kinds of systems and incentives around that that pushes in that direction. It leads to, dare I say, fraud. It leads to massaging the numbers, and it ultimately doesn't allow us to deal with complexity and complex systems. So thanks for that, Dave. All right, show me your next one. This is the increase in compliance workers just in Australia, over 20 years, almost double the number of compliance workers. And then you, as I said, what's the effect that we have of this increase of compliance? Well, if you look at the next one, those numbers are from France just for the hell of it, because they have the same problem. But the number of fatalities year on year across all industries in a developed country like that are the same. So you throw double the amount of compliance at it and no difference. And so we just have more rules to follow, but we have the same number of bad things happening. So next one, Dave. So that's the dilemma. Now, safety differently than sees the sort of cynicism and resignation that grow up around this. Safety becomes a target for ridicule. Nobody believes it anymore, right? We have had 23 billion days without a velociraptor incident, really? And then of course somebody thinks they're joking even more and they go, no, we haven't. There's one yesterday, right? So, but that means that if this is hanging in your workplace, that these numbers mean nothing, right? Or what they mean is really fraud and cynicism, but they have no real value. Next one. So Erich Hollnagel, of course, and that's an even bigger giant on whose shoulders we all stand. Erich Hollnagel always wants to remind us that much more goes right than goes wrong. And actually, we should say much more goes well than goes wrong, as Erich says, because right would presume that there is a single way, a single path for things to go well. There's a whole range of ways in which things can go well. And that's illustrated by this curve, this normal curve, this Gaussian, all right? And so we focus on this tiny portion in the quarter and say, those incidents, we don't want those incidents. That red needs to be smaller. And how do we make it smaller? Well, as I said, we put all kinds of barriers and things in the way, right? Now, before we go there, instead of focusing on that red bit, there's all this white bit of normal work. You could argue that down the mean, right, the mean of the figure down the center, there would be the compliant, perfectly compliant world. This is how people are supposed to work. But things go well even away from that mean. A couple of standard deviations away from that mean, from that center of the figure, work still succeeds. People get stuff done. They do not get hurt. And so the world is complex and big and varied. And so just saying to people, comply so you don't have an incident, ignores all this other data, right? We make things go well in all of these cases. Now, one of my students, and in fact, one of Erich's and my students, an obstetrician who was getting her PhD, she said, it's silly in safety. It's crazy. You focus on only the things that go wrong in order to understand how to make them go right. Yeah, that is like studying a few cases of divorce and domestic violence to understand how you should have a great, happy, healthy, lifelong marriage. So in order to understand how you should stay married to your first love for the rest of your life, just study a few divorce cases. Crazy, right? And that's what she said. So this is crazy. It is a very strange way of trying to improve something, right? By looking at the few cases where it didn't work. So in response to this obsession with wanting to make these bad things go away, yes, we think about barriers, and then we think about barriers some more. Next one. What barriers can we put in place so things don't go wrong? Not just physical barriers, all kinds of other barriers, procedural barriers, people barriers, redundancies, right? Because, as I said, this idea is that people are our problem to control, right? And we need to control that problem by putting fences around it, right? By ring fencing it and protecting the world from this source of harm and unreliability. So this is, of course, a typical figure. It's been around for the last 30 years and itself is, well, more than that now, and in itself is based on a figure basically from the 1930s. So this thinking has been around for a long time, not because it's correct, but because it's simple. And so one hospital decided, you know what, that's a great idea. We have a problem. Yeah, go ahead, Dave. In our hospital, and that is we have errors with nurses giving out drugs. And so the wrong dose, the wrong drug, the wrong patient, the wrong amount, whatever. And so that's bad because drugs can be pretty toxic if you have the wrong dose or the wrong drug. And so people can get hurt and even die as a result of these drug errors. Now, there is this idea that if you interrupt the nurse when the nurse is on the drug round, going around the beds and giving drugs to patients, and you interrupt the nurse, you disturb her with or him with another question, the chance of errors goes up. That's the idea. The research on this is a little ambivalent, but it makes intuitive sense. So this hospital says, oh, we need to stop the nurse from being interrupted. No more interruptions. How do you stop the nurse from being interrupted? You put a vest on the nurse, and the vest says, drug round, do not disturb, go away, leave me alone, piss off. That's what the vest says. And so the hospital got these vests, put them on the nurse that was doing the drug round. And then our lab studied the implementation of this. And my student, one of the PhD students involved, he came back and said, I am confused because the nurse who wears the vest gets interrupted more. And so we had to think about that a little bit, because the idea was that the nurse will be interrupted less. That's what it says, do not interrupt. But of course, a nurse with a vest is really easy to see, particularly if everybody else is dressed the same way. And so I'm looking for a nurse. Oh, the one with the vest is a nurse. Oh, here we go. And so the nurse with the vest gets interrupted more. This is where a barrier, and of course, the vest is a barrier, right? Barrier around you, right? And procedural barrier with that, with text, right? So this is a barrier in multiple ways, where barrier thinking in a complex world doesn't work, right? It just crashes. It doesn't work. And so it's a great example of the underestimation of complexity. It is also a great example of our misunderstanding of people's own, as René Amalberti, another giant in the field, beautifully says, native resilience. So people's own native resilience. Now, so Rafael is writing to us. Thanks for that note. He says it's very interesting, and there's a similar story from a pharmaceutical manufacturing where he worked, operators doing the changeover for quality issues. And I think, Rafael, thank you for your contribution. Yes, the stories of barriers that were supposed to do one thing and then either did the opposite or had a whole range of side effects that were unplanned and probably not what you wanted. That rate, most everybody has stories like that. And often we think about this as a failed safety intervention, or people don't try hard enough, or they should really read the text, or we need to change the color of the vest or whatever. But what we don't do is break out of this barrier mindset where we think our role is to stop everything from going wrong. All right. And that's the issue. The issue is we're applying the wrong model for a complex world. And so, which is why this conversation today, right? So, good. Sorry. Thanks, Paulo. I appreciate that. Cool. We'll discuss that during the Q&A, but it's okay. I'm okay to jump in with questions and remarks along the way. Obrigado, Paulo. Obrigado. Dave, next one, because it can get pretty bad, right? This obsession, this focus with making everything that can go wrong stop, right? And companies get obsessed with even the small stuff, right? And they think that if you stop the small stuff, you also stop the big stuff because you somehow have a great safety culture or whatever the illusion might be. We all know by now that this triangle thinking is a myth. It's false, it's disproven. The data on which it was based originally in the 1930s was fraudulent to begin with. And so you can read all this in one of my many books, but That's all right, because I write them quicker than you can read them. So, but you see in this picture that one of the strong proponents of this way of thinking, right? We have to help you stop everything from going wrong, right? This company itself had suffered a pretty bad accident. Four people died, and in a gas accident in this plant. Now, when the managers and the media come out to talk to the media, this picture is taken by a colleague at NPR, or at the Houston Chronicle rather. And you see in the picture, right? So here they are talking about a gas release that killed 4 people. But what are they telling their people when they go on site? Please take extra precaution when driving and walking, because it is our role as safety people to stop everything from going wrong. Well, you know, perhaps the people who died, among them 2 brothers, by the way, drove very carefully. Perhaps they took extra precaution when they were walking on site, and yet they died. They're going to go home in a bag, right? And so the terrible week for that little town. So this strategy no longer works, right? And that's the realization of, and if it ever did, right? Of course, it's a noble pursuit. Of course, we have to think how we can achieve a world in which people show up for work and don't leave dead. Absolutely, that's definitely an obligation. But to make it a safety strategy leads to these sorts of things. So here's a company down south here that says, nobody gets hurt today. Again, our role is to stop everything from going wrong. No, because when you look at what goes on inside of this company, this is what's going on. 1,200 people in this company, and they all have this little hip pack, this pack on their body. And in that pack is their own first aid kit. So when they get injured, they can fix themselves up, right? Because of course they cannot go anywhere, because the company, nobody gets hurt. They don't want injuries. We want 0. So the place they fix themselves up is the toilet, right? So they go to the toilet to fix themselves up, right? To put Band-Aids on or to whatever it is that they need to do. The reason for the toilet is there's no cameras, no surveillance, all right? Without surveillance, you can pretend that you are injury-free, right? Now, for a company to say to its employees, we don't want to hear about your suffering. We see no evil, hear no evil. We don't want to know. I find that rather unethical. I find that more unethical than being more realistic about the claim that you don't want to injure anyone. Next one, Dave. So in order to understand this really important idea that work mostly goes well, we have to understand work as actually done rather than work as it is imagined. Again, this is a distinction introduced by Eric Hollnagel in 2012, right? Hence the shoulders of that giant on whose shoulders we indeed all stand when we talk about this stuff. Work as imagined happens in a world of planning and procedures and rules and computer screens and managers and supervisors. But then when you go on site, like this one, and this may actually be one site that that comes from Kim's previous organization, Kim, you'll know, where you want to work on the water main underneath, and there's all this electrical and telecom crap over the top of it, and all of a sudden your plans have to change. And so work as done happens in a complex world where surprises happen, where novelty occurs, where things aren't as they were specified in the plan, where things fall outside of the procedures and the rules that you thought would cover the whole job. And so this becomes then reliant on people's insight, people's frontline contributions, people's, again, to say with René Amalberti, native resilience. I love that word, native resilience, to solve the problem. Let's go to the next picture to show you the difference. Don't worry about this one, Dave. In the area just south of here where I am now, our lab was doing another project with these people putting new pipes in a sewer system. So sewer system, new pipes go in. And this picture is taken when the boss is watching. So the boss, the project director, is standing right next to David, not that David, another David, one of my prior PhD students. Many of them are called David for some reason. It was a popular name in that generation. It still is, I think. Anyway, so David takes this picture and the boss, the project director, is standing next to him. So the guys are almost fully compliant. In fact, you could argue they are fully compliant. There's confined space procedures because they could fall in the hole. I mean, they can't because they wouldn't fit. It's too small and it's very shallow. But there's the triangle, right, with the line on it, so he can't fall supposedly. Although if he falls, then the triangle will fall on top of him. But the boss is happy. And then the boss says, all right, I will check the other team. And he wanders off. David stays. And then David takes the next picture. The guys go, all right, let's get some work done. Fascinatingly, the pipe goes in the ground 2.5 times quicker, right? So you have a pretty much a productivity increase of 250% right there. Boom. Just by letting the guys do the work the way they see fit. And the question is this unsafe? No, because he's sitting on his butt. He's not going to go in the hole, right? I mean, if he needs to go, you have to push him, right? I mean, he's not moving, right? So the risks are essentially all mitigated. Not only that, the work is faster, more efficient. He doesn't bust up his shoulders, right? Won't get hurt. And so when you see this, which the boss doesn't because he wandered off, but when you see this, I always am reminded of the fact that when you do the formal audits, when you do formal inspections, very little work is actually going on, very little, because people just want to look compliant. But because they are stringently trying to follow all the rules, very little work actually gets done, right? In contrast to this sort of work where you understand and see and get to know the guys and they're comfortable with you being around, work actually goes efficiently and fast and safe all at the same time. And this is where Kim will tell you the stories of her own organization, where when you set people free inside a frame, freedom in a frame, you say, here's the frame, here's some of the rules we can agree on, right? Inside of that, you are free to use your insight, your native resilience, your workmanship, your knowledge, your experience to get stuff done, right? Because that's why we hired you. So go ahead, Dave. The reminder is this, right? Let's go back to this figure. Remember that we talked about this idea of trying to just focus on the red bit and saying, no, there's all of this white stuff where things go well when you give people the freedom in a frame to solve the problems in a way that they understand them to be, right? And when you encounter them like that in, for example, the guy sitting on his butt doing the pipe in the hole, don't say, why are you not complying? You are violating. Who is responsible for this? No, what you should ask is, why does it make more sense for you to work this way? Why does it make more sense? And what is responsible for putting you in this position where we have these stupid rules and you cannot get the work done efficiently with them? So what's responsible for creating these obstacles, right, that make your work more difficult? Those are the sorts of questions that we have learned to ask in safety differently. Of course, the most courageous question is, what's the stupidest thing that we're asking you to comply with? Now, one example is an important one that I think opened my eyes, even previous to work as imagined versus work as done, or even prior to safety 1, safety 2 ideas. This was in the mid-2000s, working in a hospital in which 1 in 13 of the cases went wrong. And so patient died, wrong limb amputated, drug errors, all kinds of nasty things can happen. For a hospital, it's actually not that unsafe. All right. So we asked them, okay, you investigate all the one that goes wrong. Yeah, we do. Well, what do you find? This is what they found, right? In all of the cases that went wrong, they kept finding these violations and guidelines not followed and people doing workarounds, calculation errors, you know, the math skills are terrible, technologies that are really not working, not very user-friendly. People can't find their instruments, they can't find their other people, frustrations with the organization. So they kept finding these things. And I said, okay, so if you keep finding these sorts of causes, then what are you doing about it? Well, we try to stop these from happening, right? Typical response, right? That these are bad, we need to stop that. And I go, well, how is that working for you? Well, not very well, because it is still happening and we still are in 1 in 13. So it's not having any effect. And so then we asked the proto-Eric Holnagel question, which was, what about the other 12? And they said, what do you mean the other 12? Well, what happens in them? They said, we don't know. I said, well, let's investigate. We don't have time to investigate because we're so busy with these others that go wrong. So we went in and did it for them. So for 12 weeks, we went in and investigated the ones that go well. And so in order to do that, you have to observe normal work. And of course, you've already seen this, but what's fascinating in the cases that went well, you see the same things. You see workarounds and shortcuts and violations, guidelines not followed, errors, miscalculations, people not, can't find tools, unreliable instrumentation, user unfriendly technologies, organizational frustrations. It's all the same. It doesn't matter whether things go well or wrong, because this is the messy life and the messy interior of a hospital work every day, right? So trying to stop these things from going wrong will give you nothing, no improvement, because they happen even when things go well in the messy interior of actual work. This was an important insight, but it also generated an important question, which is, but what then is responsible for the one going wrong and the 12 going well? So what is the separation? What explains this? So we had to go back to the data, and this is what we found. What we found was that in the 12 that went well, we typically saw more diversity. We saw more diversity of background, of gender, of hierarchy, and the possibility to show a dissenting voice, as in, I disagree with the course of action chosen. I think we should be doing this. We saw more of a discussion about risk that is being kept alive in these teams. We saw past success not being taken as a guarantee of future safety, not in a complex world. The fact that it went well now doesn't mean that, or previously doesn't mean it will go well with the same case, or similar case this afternoon. The genuine ability to say stop in a team, right, really made a key difference. Deference to expertise made a difference, as in listening to the expert, not the boss, but the person who knows, right? Because the boss is probably not the expert. Teams that weren't waiting for audits or inspections to improve things, those were the teams that belonged to the 12 that went well. teams that have been better able to break down departmental and hierarchical barriers were in better shape. And finally, we found the importance of pride of workmanship, right? The pride of doing things well. If a team has that pride, it actually correlates with better outcomes. Now, I don't know what's causal in that, but that doesn't matter. The fact that it correlates is an important reminder of, if we give people this opportunity to develop these skills, to develop these capacities that make things go well, we make a much better investment in safety than trying to stop things from going wrong. Next one, Dave. So this is a typical example, and I'll finish off with the last three here. A typical example of how to stop things from going wrong, right? Go here, don't go here, go this fast, stop here, start there, and you go, I am confused. There is so much compliance. And so for those of you, and I saw a little thing in the chat about this, those of you who have seen Safety Differently, which does have, I think, Portuguese subtitles, the film, will have seen that the next one, Dave, thank you, this square actually features in this film, because it is the embodiment of the idea of Safety Differently. Set people free. There is a frame. Absolutely. The frame is still, there are certain rules, there are certain requirements, 30 kilometers an hour, give way to the right. There are certain rules. But inside of that, there is freedom. The more safety you create, the less native resilience you will get, because people aren't allowed to think. They aren't allowed to use their own insights, initiatives, and interpretations to make things go better. And so the more safety you think you can create, the less native resilience you will get. The less safety you create, like here, the more native resilience you get. The results are remarkable. On a square like this, you actually have fewer accidents than there were before, when the system was all organized according to the safety one principles, lots of signs and lights and stop things and barriers. With it all gone, you leave it to people to sort it out. And you get effects, emerging effects that are typical for complexity. The blue van, for example, is not going to go faster than the little lady until they're past the lady. Now, nobody ever wrote a rule for that. There is no procedure for what to do when you pass an old lady. No, this happens as an interaction between the components in the complex system. And so you get these novel things. Now, sometimes it looks dangerous, and that's what people say. Oh, that square looks really dangerous. Yeah, but it actually is much safer. And so you cannot participate in this square and not be engaged in the creation of your own native resilience vis-a-vis what other users do. I will let you go with one final picture, and that's this one. Here's Nick, and I think Nick shows it beautifully, and as an introduction to Kim. Nick is working on a site, and he has a hard hat, and his hard hat has a sticker on it at the back, which is difficult to see, but it says GSD. Thank you, Dave. And I asked the guy that I was walking besides, and I said, what does GSD mean? And he said, oh, GSD, that means get shit done. And so he's got get shit done on his helmet. Ultimately, that's what Safety Differently is about, right? Getting shit done, yes, but by giving people the opportunity to become the problem solvers, by us stopping from seeing people as a problem that we need to control because we think we know better. No, we don't. They do this every day. People are our solution. Let's ask them what they need to do it even better. Let's understand, identify, and then enhance the capacities that make things go well and set them free inside of that frame. Thank you. Obrigado.
Vou falar em português para o pessoal entender a pergunta aqui. O pessoal está parabenizando você, Kim. Muito legal mesmo. Como fazer, Sidney e Kim, como fazer para que as pessoas se comportem de forma segura quando não estão sob vigilância?
So I'm happy to try to interpret that, unless you're going to give me an English version of it, or a Dutch, or a Swedish, or a French, or a German, or a Danish version.
The question is how to ensure that people behave safely when they are not under surveillance.
Oh, Kim, that's a wonderful safe. That's a lovely safety one question. Eh? Tell me, what would you say? I would say it's the wrong question to ask. But, so how do we ensure that people behave safely when they're not under surveillance?
Yeah, it is an excellent question. It's the whole challenge of the safety profession, is it not? How do we do that?
I think it's the wrong question to ask. I think it's
I'm happy
totally...
to give it a go, Sid. I'm happy to give it a go. I think the more compliance focused the organization is, the more it's driving this authoritarian parental approach to safety, where if I don't do it a particular way, I'll get written up, I'll get perhaps the sack, I'll be terminated. I think the more we drive that type of approach, the more we will get that behavior. Where at 2 o'clock in the morning, the guys on the job, when there's no supervisors around, or the rule book goes out the window. So I think to address that, I think we need to do a fair amount of discovery into what those goal conflicts are, what the workarounds are, how are they utilizing the safety management system? Is it actually helping them be safer, or do they just ignore it? Is it just some big bloated system that sits on the shelf? And I think once we start that process, we can find out how the job really happens. We can build some trust. We can find out some interesting stories. And then from there, we could declutter our safety management system and create that freedom in a framework where we know the outcome, we know the goal, we know the hard boundaries, but inside of that, like you said, Sidney, inside of that, we can say to the guys, look, this is what you have to achieve. And this is, you work out how you're going to achieve it inside these boundaries. So then we can lie in bed at night, asleep as leaders, knowing that the guys out there, they are behaving in a safe way. The job will happen safely, so to speak. So that's not a quick process, right? But I believe that it is possible to start to dive into that and turn that culture around. But if that's what you're seeing, I would say that's probably a culture that's fairly authoritarian and compliance focused.
I will add. Paulo, hang on. So my claim that this is the wrong question to ask is as follows. The question is predicated on the assumption that people come to work to do a bad, lousy, uninterested, unmotivated job. This premise has been proven wrong time and time again. People come to work to do a good job. Nobody comes to work to do a bad job. What the question is premised on is the idea that people do not have the intrinsic internal motivation to do work well, that they do not have the motivation to achieve goals, that they have no interest in seeing an overlap between their own goals and the organization's goals. All of these things have been disproven since the mid-19th century with the work of the Prussians, the work of Doug McGregor at MIT, who wrote about theory X and theory Y in work, right, which is sort of a prototype of safety 1 and safety 2 thinking. The idea that you need to force people, cajole them, heavy surveillance in order to get them to do anything that you want. seems founded on very old-fashioned 19th century ideas about work, supervision, and the relationship between the two. What Safety Differently and Safety 2 wants to do is depart from these old-fashioned assumptions and say, there is internal motivation. People want to do a good job, but in order to do a good job, they need the sense of ownership, right, Kim? The sense of engagement, the sense of being part of the solution. When you give people that, you get the very different conversation going, by which time anything to do with surveillance, or as Kim intimated, this concern about them not doing the job in the one specific way that you think is right, that concern disappears. It is no longer relevant. And so, but I think what the question illustrates is the depth of the commitment to this safety one, old-fashioned command and control, hierarchical, I know best, I am smart, you are dumb, I need to look at you all the time to ensure that you are doing the right thing. The depth of these really old-fashioned commitments to work and workers is something that we need to do battle with. And that is going to take a long time. But we are in the 21st century. We are no longer in the 19th century, not even in Brazil.
Thanks.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Paulo. If we wanna people behave safely with under surveillance, we should stop surveilling them.
Yep.
That's it.
That's it. It's just like without prosecutors, there would be no crime. Without surveillance, there is no non-compliance.
Yeah, I don't think that work make people behaving better is our goal here. So I think that's why Sidney says it's the wrong question. You know, we don't want to. We need to create conditions for better behavior and not working the behavior by itself.
Create conditions, setting people up for success, Hugo. Setting people up for success, which begins by asking them what they need to do it even better. Which begins by asking, what are the obstacles, right, that we put in your way, right, to make things go well? What's the stupidest thing that we're asking you to comply with, right? Those sorts of questions. And then you will gradually find that surveillance is less and less necessary to get great outcomes. It takes trust, absolutely. And trust takes a long time to build and is easy to break, right? So.
Thanks. I think I need to highlight something. Ronald is a captain, he's a pilot. And I think his comment comes from his own frustration in the industry.
Obrigado. I'd love to be your co-pilot. Well, it depends on what equipment you fly, but.
I think he flies the big ones because he is based in Dubai. So, yeah.
Oh, right. So he always flies at night. and transmeridian. That's not a good life.
All right. So, take the opportunity that I have to thank you. This is great. I highly recommend it for everybody to buy this one.
Thank you. You actually keep up with the readings, Paulo. It is a remarkable accomplishment.
Well, you did that to me when you sent me to Loon.
You got to read quick. Yeah.
All right, guys. I'll read the next one is in Portuguese first, and then I'll translate to English. Essa pergunta vem do Anderson Costa para quem? Ele pergunta sobre evidências geram números e números geram estatísticas. As empresas usam hoje estatísticas para fazerem comparativo com o real número de acidentes e entender até onde está sendo eficiente essas ações. Tentar medir tudo seria uma forma de ir contra esse pensamento da segurança diferente? Interessante. Let's go. I'll translate now. It's a quite long one, but that's for Kim. Anderson, he asked whether the evidence comes with numbers and statistics. Companies tend to use the numbers in statistics to compare the real number of accidents and to know how they are progressing. So to keep monitoring and measuring everything goes against safety differently or not?
So Paulo, is the question that if we build a lot of metrics around monitoring and measuring, you're saying that's not a safety two approach?
I think his question is like, yes, whether if we keep doing that, keep measuring everything, would be against the idea behind safety differently.
So here in Australia, under Australian legislation, certain leaders in organisations have a legislative obligation to monitor the safety performance of an organisation. So for me, then the question would be, what are the metrics that would inform and help them fulfill that obligation? So yes, you could go and monitor and measure many, many things, and they wouldn't be helpful at all. And that would be perhaps a, not the way to go on it. So I think the due diligence index has been helpful at helping us identify what we should be monitoring and measuring, rather than throwing the net widely and measuring a whole bunch of things that really don't matter. So I'm going to pass to Sidney to pick up the rest of the answer on that question. Sidney, do you have any insights into how to approach that if we're looking specifically at the monitoring aspect?
The challenge that safety differently, sorry, I'll let the translators give them some space. The challenge that safety differently and safety two faces is to suggest the measurability of the kinds of capacities that we believe are important in creating safety, even under varying conditions. Because again, if we just measure the things that we don't want to go wrong, like the incidents and injuries, that's not predictive. It's not helping us. If we measure the capacities that make things go well under all kinds of conditions, then that is actually predictive. The due diligence capacities that Kim talked about are related to, for example, learning. So how do we measure your learning? They are related to your, your team's knowledge of safety practices and theories as they might be applicable to your organization. How do you measure that? We are working on that, and we, in fact, there is a consortium of companies now gathering around the due diligence index. And Kim, I think we should make sure that colleagues have the have ways to connect into this conversation, and some companies are among the early adopters. Ultimately, I think, as always with safety two, we have to go to the final audience and target group for these measurements, and I think that's the company's boards. Boards are super concerned about performance, liability, legal requirements, because they themselves can get in trouble if these things don't work out well. But they're often super underinformed about what that might mean for safety. And they just think that one number, the recorded incidents or something, is enough, that's all they need to know and can compare. What we are about to embark on is a conversation and with boards across the globe, for that matter, to get them on board and engage them, to get them to understand and to listen to their concerns and desires, that if you want to know about the capacities in your business that make things go safe, how would that look? What would the measures look like? And again, we already have 6 pretty good measures that are being tested at the moment that can, I think, become somewhat representative of safety 2, safety differently. Kim, help me with the 6. What are they again? Do you have them there?
The 6 obligation, the 6 parts of the index. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, verify, monitor, knowledge, understand. I think effectiveness. That's
Learning.
5. So yeah, I'm missing one.
And learning.
And learning. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So now, no measure is perfect. What gets measured gets manipulated. It is that simple, right? I mean, that's the truth in any organization. So that will go for these measures as well. But I think the group is trying to insulate them against that. So, but ultimately, we measure a lot that doesn't matter. And the things that matter are often quite difficult to measure. So this will remain an interesting challenge. Paulo, back to you.
Thank you. I like what I heard from you once, the LGI.
Yeah. So rather than the LTI, yes, we're concerned with the LGI, the looking good index.
Yeah,
so,
that's a good one.
Which, yeah, it shows all the manipulation and case management that goes into making ourselves look good. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to ask you both to put the interpretation in English so you can hear the translator when we say in Portuguese, so we don't need to repeat. So please, if you can do this. I'll go to the next question.
Is there an
Vamos
action on me?
tentar. Felipe, por favor. Can you guys hear me in English? Can you guys hear the translator? Vocês ouvem o tradutor? Tá funcionando? Posso fazer a pergunta? Are you guys listening to me? Sim?
I am, but I don't
Okay,
think I'm the
okay.
target audience.
Ok, vou perguntar em português. 2 perguntas muito simples aqui, né? A primeira para os dois, né? Vocês acreditam em BBS? Vocês acham que BBS tem algum efeito? É bom para a segurança? E a segunda, como convencer os líderes, a alta direção a tentar algo novo, aí além da segurança tradicional, como que deve ser o approach dos profissionais de segurança que tiveram os olhos abertos para essas novas visões, como que eles devem fazer a aproximação para convencer a alta direção e conseguir o apoio necessário para dar o passo adiante.
So you go, I can try to answer that. I think the belief in BBS and how to convince of the value of an alternative, and if I misunderstand the question, which wasn't translated, let me know. But is in I think to your leadership, painting the contrasts as sharply as you can. BBS, or behavioral-based safety, or behavioral safety, or behaviorist safety, is based on the idea that the system is basically safe, that the system is well designed, that we have all the procedures and tools in place to make things go well, and that the remaining gap that we need to close from there to perfect safety is this unreliable, not always dependable human behavior. That's our problem. That's what we need to focus on. Now, this belief was very popular in the 1920s and 1930s. So behaviorism was the thing that drove psychology, because we truly believed at the time that we cannot change the system. The system is what it is. And the question, though, is, if you really believe that safety is your target, all right, we have since learned that you can only change behavior by changing the system that creates and drives that behavior. This is the fundamental human factors principle, right? If you want to change behavior, you have to change the system that creates and drives that behavior. Otherwise, you will keep chasing behavior interventions, which I think, of course, BBS consultants want you to do because it gives them an income, right? Because if you don't change the system and you get new workers the whole time, you have to talk to them again. You have to intervene with them. No, think about the system that drives that behavior. What are the obstacles, the constraints, the goal conflicts, the tools that are not working, the gap between rules and reality, right? The work is imagined versus the work is done, the safety clutter, to believe that we can solve a behavioral problem by targeting behavior is both almost a century out of date and I think fundamentally unethical. I presume that was in part the question, but
I think was a direct answer to the question for sure. The question was around BBS, whether or not we should keep doing BBS. So,
no.
And if there was any value in keep doing so. Thank you.
So there are some very tasteful comments in the chat on this. So
yeah. Kim, any comments on those questions?
I would ask the leaders, is this working? Who's frustrated? They probably hate it as well. I find that sometimes they'll sort of make a justification for why it's there, but then they'll sort of admit, and you ask them, well, what are we learning from that? Not much. So maybe you can help them, find out what their objections are to it and, leverage off that. But certainly I found taking the research as to why behavior-based safety is not an effective approach and posing some questions to get them thinking, posing different research to them is really helpful in helping them move away from behavior-based safety, because they probably don't realize they're stuck firmly in the past. They don't realize that perhaps the safety industry's moved on. They think that this is how everyone else is doing it.
Yep. And I mean, it's not, I agree, Kim. It's not necessarily that the engagement is bad or destructive to the conversation, but again, it is the premise entering into it, which is, I am smart, you are dumb, I know what the right behavior is, you don't, so I need to teach you, I need to do surveillance, I need to have incentives and sanctions to get you to do the right behavior. That fundamentally violates everything that the research base tells us, which is, again, there is this whole range of behavior that leads to good outcomes. People don't come to work to do a bad job. And that if we come in top down, from the top to the bottom, right, hierarchically say, this is the right way to work, we are denying ourselves the learning and discovery for how things go well. I would love the BBS person to explain to me the get shit done on the back of the hard hat, right? How would they see that? They would probably just see that as, oh, that's a violation. That's, this guy should not be trusted. He needs to be BBS'd more, No, you have to learn from this guy because he gets shit done in all kinds of ways, right? And what is right and what is wrong in that is not for you to say.
Só comentário rápido aqui, né, Paulo? Como a gente está falando para o Brasil, né, eu vou falar com os brasileiros, e os brasileiros têm um cenário um pouco diferente, né? A gente precisa defender nossos empregos, a gente não tem uma situação econômica favorável, então a gente, em algumas empresas, é forçado a fazer várias coisas que a gente não acredita, mas que precisa honrar os compromissos e tal. Então, meu conselho para esses é que vocês ponham os músculos de vocês no que vocês são obrigados e o cérebro no que vocês acreditam, e o coração. E aí as coisas vão sair bem. Esse é o meu conselho.
Thank you. Hugo, you have to talk slower, man. You have to talk slower. You have to parse your words. I
think Hugo was saying about the fact that sometimes, and as a safety professional, you work for a company which wants to go in that direction, and you don't really have choice, so you have to go with the flow. But at the same time, you have to be aware that goes against your belief, but to maintain your job, to pay your bills, unfortunately, you have to apply that. But knowing, have the knowledge, and have the critical thinking, you prepare you to sort of do things differently as soon as you can. I have to say something too in regard to my own experience in that sense, just adding to that a little bit, is the fact that my frustration with VBS was regard to the fact that everything was about the worker, not about the system, not about anything else. And that always frustrated me. I was like, that's not possible. I could see all the problems around, and I was looking at the person. Sort of an assumption that everything else is right, and the person is
wrong.
What I need to control.
See. Yeah. Which is arrogant and wrong and short-sighted. And you don't learn. You just, we will keep beating them until compliance improves. It doesn't work.
Temos tempo para mais uma pergunta, Paulo.
Yeah, just one more question before the break.
Are we out of time already? This is too much fun.
No, it's been great. The time flies. Let me pick one here. There's this. I'll speak Portuguese first. Essa pergunta vem do Rubens. Quando se fala em métricas, a pirâmide Bird é uma referência na avaliação de gestão. Caso negativo, por quê? Okay, Sidney and Kim, the question is regard to metrics. The Bird pyramid is a reference if for the management of safety and evaluation. If not, why?
Read my book, The Foundations. Perhaps you have it lying around there as well, Paulo. Oh, you do? Oh, you're joking. Okay. The answer is Obrigado. The answer is in the book, but very briefly, the data on which the original Heinrich triangle is based was fraudulently acquired. The method was rickety. Half the data has been made up, is not actually real. But not only that, I know that Frank Bird then came in the 50s and 60s and tried to get some better data underneath it in a larger empirical base. But it's still proven wrong time and again whenever fatalities happen. For example, take the Macondo disaster, Deepwater Horizon. 7 years of 0 injuries, 7 years, 0 incidents, 0 injuries, right? And then what is it, 11 deaths, 11 fatalities, all of a sudden, right? That's not a triangle, that's a T, 0, 0, 0, 0, boom, right? And so it's a mushroom, boom. And so it is not predictive. Having low injury counts, low incident numbers is not predictive of whether you're going to have fatalities or not. In fact, it probably is, but inversely so, right? And that's what the results, the real data is showing us, that if there is a triangle, it's actually inverted, right? It's not like this, it's like this. And so low injury and incident numbers are really dangerous, right? So stop believing in the triangle. It's wrong. It always was wrong, and it certainly belongs to the century past.
Nós estamos muito atrasados no tempo aqui, mas eu tenho que fazer uma pergunta aqui, que nós temos um espião aqui no meio. Alguém de alguma reguladora. A pergunta é se existe espaço para safety differently para os organismos reguladores, para as agências reguladoras. Como que eles podem aplicar os conceitos de safety different sendo reguladores e não a indústria?
Okay, I'll translate. Sidney, the question comes from, I think, from somebody from the regulator, the Brazilian body, asking for for the regulator themselves, how could they explore and utilize safety differently in a practical way?
Very good question. Thank you. In our experience, the shift to more and more performance-based regulation, where you are not asking for specific compliance targets from a company, but you are asking the company to show that they have their safety management system, that they're performing in ways and have systems and processes in place that can assure safe outcomes. The role of the regulator is to say to these companies, don't go overboard. The more you write, the more we will find you to be in non-compliance, right? So write less. More is not more, right? More rules, more internal stuff, more internal compliance demands, more internal rules are not going to convince us. That's the maturity that regulators need to show in safety to safety differently. Because of course, if you go into a performance-based regulatory regime, right, where you ask companies to demonstrate that they know what they're doing, they will throw everything at you. This is what my first-year students do, right? They tell me everything from the whole bloody book when I ask them one question on the exam, so that they can convince me that at least they have read everything and they think everything, you know, if I tell everything, he has to be happy. No, I'm not happy. There's too much crap, right? So answer the question. So don't be a first-year student and tell that to your organizations. That's what I would want to say to the regulator, right? Say, convince me differently. Now, remember the Woolworths experiment in the Safety Differently film. Lots of regulators involved, right? And the regulator, they also understood that they wanted to see something different because more of the same and more internal rules and processes and bureaucracy was no longer convincing them. So the regulator wanted to see something different, right? Which included throwing everything out and starting over from the bottom up. And so that regulator was very happy with what Woolworths did. So watch the film and you'll see that happen.
Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Thank you so much, guys. It was a pleasure having you with us for the Brazilian audience exclusively. It was amazing.
De nada.
Next time we are going to talk in Portuguese. Dave, any words?